Welcome to the Pat White Show.
Well, here's something you probably heard about in the news. It seems that Pete Rose has been, reinstated into baseball by the baseball commissioner. Now, it's been a lot of years since Pete was thrown out of baseball because he was gambling on baseball. And there's a lot of commissioners of baseball that didn't want to reinstate him. But a lot of pressure was brought on the current commissioner, and he decided to reinstate not only Pete Rose, but also Shoeless Joe Jackson, two of the great players. Now, here's the big thing everybody's talking about. Okay, Pete's been reinstated, so is Shoeless Joe. But can they get in the Hall of Fame? And that's the bigger question. Can they get into the Hall of Fame? Now, according to the Hall of Fame records, only 1% of people who are nominated to the Hall of Fame get in. Only 1%. Pretty small number. And they make it that way. Now, is Pete qualified to get in with his numbers? Well, probably. 4,156 hits. Nobody's ever done that. That's pretty good. And a lot of other stuff he's done. A lot of years in baseball. But if you go to the Baseball Hall of Fame, you're going to find out there are only 343 elected members of the Baseball Hall of Fame. Elected members. Now, 270 of them are players, former players. 135 were elected by the Baseball Writers Association. That's the national group that elects people to be in the Hall of Fame. And those are made up of executives and managers and even umpires in the Hall of Fame, believe it or not. Well, the breakdown is this. There's 84 pitchers, 19 catchers, 26 first basemen, 20 second basemen, and there's third basemen. There's 18 of those. Left field has got 26, shortstop 26, center field 24, right field 27. Now, there's 23 managers in there, and 10 umpires, believe it or not, and 40 executives / pioneers. All right, so how do you get elected to the board of to the National Hall of Fame? Well, you have to be eligible. You have to play at least 10 years. All right, 10 years in the big leagues. Obviously, Pete Rose qualifies in all those. Now, what you do is you have to get, are you ready? You have to get 75% of the votes from the Baseball Writers Association of America. And here's the thing I think may be interesting. You know, the writers today in baseball are not the same writers that back in the era of Pete Rose when he was playing with the Cincinnati Reds and ultimately, the other teams that he went to. I fortunately, living here, I was able to get down to see Pete Rose play and some opening season, because I had to take a friend down every year to opening day. So I have seen him in real life. And they call him Charlie Hustle. And when you take a look at some of the things, Pete Rose says that's the best way to slide. But he also said something interesting in that same comment. He said, plus it's a great way to get your picture in the newspaper. That is smart marketing, folks. And I think Pete Rose was involved with a crash at home plate during an All-Star game, if I remember, many years ago. And the catcher who was doing the catching when Pete slammed into him in an exhibition game, if you will, that's the All-Star game, pretty seriously injured. And I'm not sure he ever even came back to baseball. Don't know. Some others will probably tell me if I'm wrong. But will the writers of today give him 75% vote for the Hall of Fame? You can vote up to 10 players, and I think it's the only maximum amount they take in any given year is 10. So there's the situation. So now you know the commissioner of baseball has put Shoeless Joe and Pete Rose back into eligibility because they're no longer on suspension from the league. But will the Baseball Writers Association of America actually decide they are going to vote for Pete Rose to be in the Hall of Fame? Don't know. I can't tell you. I don't know if they will or not. One would hope they would, but can't guarantee anything. So now you know what's going on. Only 1% of baseball players are actually in there, and there's 343 in the Baseball Hall of Fame. So it's a little something to add into, and let's see what happens. And now you know, Pete Rose has been back and been eligible, but will the writers write him into the Hall of Fame? That is only what time will tell.
One of the more glorious aircraft in the United States inventory happens to be Air Force One. You go back to the days of Air Force One when it was a 720B or 707, if you will. John F. Kennedy, remember when he was assassinated and came back into Washington, D.C. aboard that plane. That's now in the library. And even the one that President Reagan flew on, that's also in the Reagan Library. So the planes that are usually flown by the president more often than not end up in their personal library. The interesting one going on is 40 years ago, and you keep that in mind, I'm saying 40 years ago, the U.S. acquired a Boeing 747 to replace the 707 most presidents had been using for many years. That 747 with that blue and white painting of the United States on the side, that's a glorious aircraft. Anybody who's ever seen it, it is stunning. If you've seen it up close and personal, it's even more stunning, believe me. There are two of them, and they have been flying for, like I said, 40 years. There have been certain upgrades done, but there's a brand new Boeing 747, the Dash 8 it's called, Dash 8 series, that long ago, a number of years ago, the government worked with Boeing to get a contract set up to produce three of them. Three brand new 747s replaced the old one that everybody's been flying on for the last 40 years. Trouble is, it still hasn't been produced by Boeing. They're 3 years behind. 3 years. Trump came in and said, hey, they're overcharging us for this thing. And supposedly it's going to be about $4 billion. He got it down to around $3.5 billion. But Boeing has still not delivered the airplane. He's still riding on the same old 747 that's 40 years old. Now, so the country of Qatar, let's be honest, folks, they got more money than they know what to do with. They have decided to give the administration one of their 747s called the Royal Palace. And yes, that's where the royal family flies in, the Royal Palace. It is a 747-8, the latest and the latest, top of the line, the best of the best. Great engines, great body, complete navigation. I mean, this is a top-dog airplane. And they're going to give it not to the president, they're going to give it to the Department of Defense. The DOD, through the United States Air Force, runs the airplane. Don't kid yourself. It's not a presidential personal airplane. It is a Department of Defense airplane flown by the U.S. Air Force. The pilots, the people who man it, are U.S. Air Force officers. Keep that in mind, not private pilots. And that airplane that they're going to, Qatar, is being given to the Department of Defense, not to President Trump as a personal aircraft. Now, hopefully Boeing will get their act together and finally deliver the 747 they have been waiting for the past 3 years to get. Still don't have it. So by the time it maybe comes in, that 707 or the 747 that President is going to be able to use from Qatar, that can be retired to his personal library, just like the ones go to the Kennedy, ones that go to the Reagan Library. All the presidents, for the most part, have their planes in their libraries. Just the way things work in Washington, D.C. The reason I'm telling you all that is there's been much hubbub saying, oh, this is a bribe from Qatar. Pam Bondi approved it because she used to work in government as a representative of Qatar. Qatar is saying, hey, we got more money we know what to do with. You need a new airplane. The one you've got is frankly old. 40 years old? Do you drive a car 40 years old, folks? Ask yourself that question. Well, the Boeing that the president currently has, the 747, that plane is 40 years old. And Boeing has yet to deliver on the new 747-8. They're 3 years behind schedule. When will that be ready? I can't tell you. But if Qatar wants to send a plane for Trump to use while he's in office, I don't see any problem with it, because it'll be retired once he leaves, and it'll end up in his library anyway. So, Rather take something you get for free and turn it into a nice Air Force One. Works for me. And then let's see if Boeing finally can deliver the Air Force One that we've been waiting on for multiple years to whomever the next president is. Or let him figure out what airplane he's going to ride. Or she. Just saying. Now you know what's going on in airplanes because I like airplanes. See ya. Well, for the last number of years, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 years, maybe even longer than that, City of Fort Wayne has owned a property right across the street from the Science Central on Clinton Street, just north of the St. Mary's River. It's about 25 acres. Originally, it was a railroad yard. Yeah, back in the old days, it was a railroad yard. Railroad cars in there and doing whatever they do, whatever liquids or whatever it is they were used on railroad cars, was being dumped in the ground in that property. Well, ultimately, the Rifkin family purchased it and turned it into a scrapyard. So it was the OmniSource scrapyard. And whatever they're doing, tearing down scrap, tearing things up, heaven knows what gets into the ground. Nobody really knew. Well, ultimately, that property was sold to the city of Fort Wayne. And it was said, okay, we need to do a study on that property to determine how bad the ground is, what kind of remediation that would need to be done. That study was done and kept in secret. I don't think anybody's totally sure why it was kept secret, but it was. I don't think the entire study has ever been released, but there are people interested in buying that 25-acre property. However, Mayor Sharon Tucker says, no. That's our land. I want to build a gigantic field house. A field house is a great big giant building, you know? And she wants to start her own sports leagues, events. City of Fort Wayne will be getting into the sporting goods or sporting business. Basketball teams or whatever kind of stuff they want to have inside a field house. Well, that's ultimately her plan. However, a number of developers have stepped forth and said, we want to buy that land. You know, Chuck Sirac, Sweetwater guy, Doden. These guys, they want to buy it. They're offering like $12 million for the land. And they already own a whole bunch of property around it. And they want to buy it. The city says, no, we're not going to sell it. It's ours. Well, recently it's been discovered that apparently in the beginning, somewhere like $300,000 or so, somewhere in that range, was appropriated by the city to do land reclamation of that 25-acre property that used to be a railroad yard and a scrap yard. Well, just been released, the amount of money that's going to cost to do the reclamation of that ground is somewhere in the range of $10 to $12 million. Is that correct? Is there really that much issue with that ground that nobody has known about? Which brings me to this point. Should the city of Fort Wayne sell the property to someone else, get it off of their hands? Because if they keep it, aren't they going to have to invest another, millions of dollars approved by the city council of your taxpayer money to do the remediation on this land and bring it back up to regular land, clean land? And heaven knows what that's going to be required to do that, because nobody really knows what's in that ground. Like I said, it was an old railroad yard, scrap yard. Goodness knows what could be dumped into that ground. But 10 to 12 million to reclaim it? Something doesn't sound right to me, folks. All I know is the city still wants it, but now they're looking at people to develop it. But who's going to pick up the tab for that remediation? Is the city of Fort Wayne going to have to pick it up? And the city of Fort Wayne means your taxpayer dollars. Is that something should be done? It's a simple question to ask. Don't mean to sound abrupt about it or anything, but as a taxpayer, I'm wondering what on earth is going on and why are we being this way? And do we need to be building a field house on property that may be bad property? And are we going to have to redeem it, reclaim it before we can sell it? Lots of questions to be asked, folks. Now you know what's going on. So if you see someone talking about it, at least you know something you probably didn't know before. And you're welcome. Well, if you happen to watch television, the chances are you've heard that President Trump is appointing an interim attorney for Washington, D.C., a federal attorney. And it's none other than Fox News personality, Judge Jeanine Pirro. Now, Judge Pirro, she's been around a long time. She was a district attorney in upstate New York. She was a judge. Matter of fact, she was the first woman ever voted in to be district attorney in her particular area of New York. She's been around the block pretty much. She knows what's going on. But the fact that she was chosen as the attorney, the federal attorney for Washington, D.C. is kind of interesting, and I'll tell you why. Originally, President Trump appointed a guy named Ed Martin. But Ed Martin's, his appointment met some rough road in the nominating committee, and Senator Tillis said, hey, I can't support this guy. Now, if you lose your Republican backing on a guy in a Republican Senate, you got some problems, and the nomination is probably not going to go through. So, his nomination was in there, but but he's being withdrawn, and the end of his nomination period ends in May the 20th. So, if the paperwork is filed on him, he's basically an interim attorney, and Judge Jeanine is being nominated to take his place. Now, the people are concerned, saying, "Well, you already had one interim attorney, a federal attorney for Washington, D.C., U.S. attorney, as they call him. Well, can you appoint another?" Once again, it's going to be a legal issue and probably will be adjudicated somewhere down the line. But let me tell you something about U.S. attorneys. In the United States, there are 94 federal attorneys. 94 exist. The most two powerful ones that exist is the Southern District of New York, that's Manhattan area in New York City, and the U.S. Attorney in Washington, D.C. Those are the two most powerful. If you remember back, if you're old enough to say this, back when Bill Clinton came in office in 1989, he fired every single U.S. attorney, all of them. And by the way, he has the right to do that. Under the law, he's the guy who can fire them. Attorney General can appoint him unnecessarily, but he can or she can't fire that person. But back in the Clinton era, he ended up appointing all new people to come in. Everybody in the previous administration fired them all. You're gone, history. And then he appointed a lady by the name of Janet Reno to be his attorney general, and frankly, you know how that all worked itself out. But so here now in Washington, D.C., Judge Pirro may become the new U.S. Attorney General on an interim basis. The interim basis, according to the rules, is 120 days. Now, will Trump appoint her and say, I'm putting her up for the slot in Washington, D.C.? If he does, she has to go in front of the Senate. That ain't going to be a trip into fantasy land, I can guarantee you. They're probably going to try to beat her up big time because they don't want her in there, because when you're in Washington, D.C. and you're the U.S. attorney, you could bring charges against a whole lot of people in Washington. And remember, Washington is the sewer of the United States. It's the swamp. Now, Trump has drained a lot of the swamp, and when you get down to the bottom of the swamp, you're down into the sewer, folks, and that's where we are. And finding out the worst of the worst, there's the U.S. attorney can bring charges against these people. But as interim, she's only good for 120 days. Now, there was a case where President Trump, a lawsuit against him, filed by a U.S. attorney, was thrown out by a judge because they said, well, the U.S. attorney was appointed illegally, wasn't certified by the Senate. Well, the problem is that could occur with Judge Jeanine, depending on what happens down the road with other trials. Other people would say, well, Judge, you did it for her, you got to do it for me. Could be something coming up. But I'm just telling you, on Wednesday, right now they are scheduled to have the swearing-in ceremony for Judge Jeanine Pirro, former prosecutor, former judge in Westchester County of New York, as the acting interim U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C. Like I said, the two most powerful U.S. attorneys in the U.S., one in the Southern District of New York and the other one in Washington, D.C. Will she ultimately be nominated as the U.S. attorney for D.C.? I don't know. It all depends. A lot of people are going to fight this out. They're going to try every judicial trick possibly can be done, prevent it from happening. But could it happen? Could she be sent before the Senate? Yes, she could. The question is going to be, does she want to go on with that? Does she want to undergo the slings and arrows that will come her direction? if she chooses to go before the U.S. Senate. It's a very interesting story, folks. But what she plans to do in the first 120 days of her assignment, that, my friends, could be very, very interesting. Let's see if she goes after some of the worst of the worst and brings charges. That, folks, is going to tell you a big story, exactly how this U.S. appointment could work out. Could it be full-time? Could be. Could it be part-time? Once again, a possibility. But overall, Judge Jeanine Pirro, former Fox host, is now about to become the U.S. Attorney for the District of Washington, D.C., and that is something a little bit unique.
Recently, Trey Gowdy, a former member of the United States Congress, was asked by a CNN reporter about the ban on transgender individuals in the United States military. What he said makes a whole lot of sense, and I'm going to add a little bit of something to it. Because here's the thing. What makes people think that it's an equal opportunity career, business, employer, call it whatever you want? What makes people think the military is equal opportunity? Because it ain't, folks. Sorry. Now, I'm saying this as a former member of the military who happens to be retired from the United States military and spent a lot of years serving my country. Nobody asked me to come in. I had to fight my way to get in to get the job that I wanted. That was flying airplanes. And if you think that's easy, you try it. Now, so the military uses prejudice all the time. And they deny citizens who are too fat, too thin, too tall, too short. Believe me, the military is prejudice. You got flat feet, you can't hear, you got all sorts of maladies. They are not going to let you in the service. Now, I will admit, back in the Vietnam War days, we had a draft. And having as someone who having lived through that draft era, I understand they were taking people. But even then, people were excused in the military saying, well, you had flat feet, you had this, you had that. Some people faked their illnesses, let's be honest. That's how it was done back then, because people didn't want to serve. Well, today, the military is very, very picky about who they take. Now, back in the Joe Biden era, and I'm going to call it an era, the military wasn't doing too well because they were trying to socially change. You cannot and should not and must never try to socially engineer the military. Sorry, that's not what we're there for. We are there to do two things: kill people and break stuff. That's our job. That's what we are hired to do. That's what we do to protect this country. War is not easy. War is not fun. War is ugly. And the job is to win the war. And whatever it takes to win it. And that's the way we're played. And you only want the best of the best. The best at, be honest, I hate to say it, the best at killing people and breaking stuff. That's what we do. Now, we don't want drug addicts in the military. We don't want malnourished people. We don't want criminal history, low IQ, anxiety, phobias, hearing damage, 6 arms. No. We don't want people hearing the voices in their head. Sorry. We don't want people who self-identify as something they ain't. Okay? We don't want that. We don't want any of that stuff. Because we can't change the rules as to what you've got to do in a war. You know, you can't run the required course in a required time if you're in a wheelchair. Sorry, the military is not your game. And if you're not a morning person, trust me, you don't want to be in the military. Now, military has one job, war. Anything else is a distraction and frankly a liability. And you got people out there, well, that isn't fair. I want to come in. War isn't fair, folks. Sorry, it doesn't work that way. You don't socially engineer the military. People who come into the military want to come into the military to, preserve the freedom of their country. They honor their country. They're patriots. They're willing to sign the dotted line that says my life can be extinguished fighting in a war. I can be dead. That's what you're signing up for when you're going to join the military. Now, you got to meet military standards. To get in, you got to qualify. You got to go through whatever the tests they are, and you got to pass the testing. Now, all of this to many people says, "Oh, how terribly unfair! Military is supposed to be equal opportunity." No, it ain't. The military is what the military is. A fighting force designed to win wars with the best people doing the best job, and it ain't ugly. It is nasty. But you know what? You put on that uniform, and you realize you're submitting your life to your nation. And you may not come back. And back in the wars, a lot of folks didn't. Vietnam, 55,000 didn't come back? Some were friends of mine. So I'm just telling you, if you think the military is equal opportunity, BS, you ain't. We're there to do one thing, win. Because if we don't win, you're going to be speaking a different language than English. Understand that? That's the real fact of life. We don't win, you're going to be in a world of hurt, folks. Just letting you know. So, anybody who says it ain't fair, we should have equal opportunity in the military, tell them BS. Wrong. Unless you're willing to give your life. And that's what everybody who signs up does.
A couple of episodes ago, I told you about a new vehicle that's going to be premiering in 2026. And that new vehicle is going to be built, believe it or not, in Warsaw, Indiana. Now, Warsaw is pretty much known as the pharmaceutical capital of Indiana for sure, because that's kind of a lot of what they do. But in this case, R.R. Donnelley has a plant in Warsaw. It was a printing plant used for a lot of production stuff that they did. Well, it's been sitting empty for a while now. And it turns out that's going to be turned into a plant, an automobile building plant, if you will. Because Jeff Bezos, yes, that's the Amazon guy, has got a brand new company and is premiering in Warsaw, Indiana, and it's called SLATE. Now, what is SLATE? SLATE is an automobile manufacturing company. Yeah, I know, it's not GM, it's not Ford, it's not Chrysler. It's a brand new product. And guess what? It's called SLATE, and it's a pickup truck. And it's also an SUV. They got a couple of versions coming out. But what's unique about them is they average about 150 miles a day on electric charge, which is pretty good if you're driving around, your city, your town, whatever. But it's the price. As you want to buy a brand new electric vehicle, you're probably going to be dropping about 60 grand. Now, if you want to get yourself one of them fancy Ford F-150 Lightnings or some of the other ones in that particular tier, if you trick it out, add a lot of stuff to it, it's going to set you back about $100,000. Just depends about what you decide you want to do with it. Well, the new SLATE is coming in at a price of $25,000. Now you're going, wait a minute. How can it be $25,000 when everything else costs $50,000, $60,000? This is bare bones, folks. This is nothing fancy. The windows are not power windows, they're crank windows. It's not going to have all those features and nice little toys and trinkets that you say you like to have, but the good news is you can put them in. And you can DIY, do it yourself. Because they're introducing a thing called, SLATE University. And there's going to be videos, apparently well-instructed videos, to show you how to add certain things to your vehicle. So if you want to put in back seat, or you want to put in this or put in that, whatever you want to put in, you can purchase that and put it in yourself. Plus, you're not buying from a dealership. You're not driving over to some place and looking to make money on you with a salesman. Nope, you're working direct with the factory. You are buying directly from the SLATE factory. Now, how's that going to work out? Well, $25,000. But here is the cool thing. The new SLATE vehicles are not coming out until, the end of next year, 2026. But you can put your reservation in now if you want one. And here's the interesting part. Since this was announced, Some 100,000, you heard me right, some 100,000 individuals have placed a deposit. And you know what the deposit is to get yourself a brand new Slate? $50. Yes, that's right. $50. 100,000 people have already put their money in to get their Slate. Imagine if you were at Detroit and you knew you had 100,000 orders already and you hadn't even opened the doors to start the assembly line. I mean, think about that, how Detroit would think about that. They'd be going, woohoo! Well, it's happening, folks, and now you kind of understand. So, yes, it's going to be coming. Now, there's going to be two versions, a pickup truck and like the SUV. If you look at them, it kind of reminds you of maybe what the Ford Bronco looked like, or maybe, and I'm going back in history here, maybe the old International Harvester pickups. If you remember those days back when they were manufactured right here in Fort Wayne. So, it's all coming up, folks. And if you want to get yourself a reservation in to get your own personal SLATE electric vehicle next year, it's pretty simple to do. All you got to do is have $50. You can put it down and get her done. So check out their website and see what they have to tell you. The all-new SLATE pickup and SUV. Cheap? Well, I'd say inexpensive. But looks like it could be kind of a cool ride for someone that wants to have an electric vehicle and not shell out, well, the entire family fortune. SLATE, check it out. You just might like it.